Okay, so I know you're a total skeptic, but hear me out on this. This happened to me, and it wasn't something I made up or exaggerated. It was legit creepy. It was a few years ago, right after I moved into that old Victorian house on Maple Street. I knew it was old, but I didn't think it would come with any baggage. Boy, was I wrong. At first, it was just the usual creaks and groans you'd expect from an old house. But then things started getting weird. Objects would move on their own. Doors would slam shut for no reason. And I'd hear footsteps in the attic when I knew I was alone. I chalked it up to the house settling, or something, until I met Sarah. Sarah was the previous owner's granddaughter. She came by to see the house and started telling me about her grandmother. Turns out, her grandmother had been quite the character. She was a bit eccentric, to say the least, and she was obsessed with the paranormal. Sarah told me her grandmother had believed that the house was haunted by the ghost of a little girl who had died there 3 years ago. She said the girl was often seen playing in the attic. I thought Sarah was just trying to scare me, but then she told me about a strange occurrence that had happened to her. She said she had been once in the attic when she felt a draft cold. That's when she turned around and saw a little girl standing there, looking right at her. I was starting to get a little freaked out, but I tried to stay calm. I figured it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then things really took a turn. One night, I was sitting in the living room reading a book. Then suddenly I heard a noise coming from the attic. I got up and went to investigate. As I was walking up the stairs, I felt a cold draft. I looked up and saw a figure standing at the top of the stairs. It was the little girl from Sarah's story. She was just standing there, staring at me. Her eyes were empty, and her face was pale. I froze, unable to move. Then she turned around and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the attic. I ran downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I wasn't imagining things. The little girl was real, and she was haunting my house. I tried to ignore it for a little while, but it was impossible. The ghostly occurrences became more frequent and more terrifying. I would hear her laughing in the attic, and I would hear her presence in the house. One night, I was laying in bed, trying to sleep. I heard a noise coming from the hallway. I got up and went to investigate. As I was walking down the hallway, I saw light coming from the attic. I went upstairs and opened the door. The attic was pitch black, but I could see a faint glow coming from one corner. I walked towards the glow and saw the little girl sitting on the floor, playing with a doll. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I tried to approach her, but she seemed to sense my presence. She turned and looked at me, her eyes filled with cold, empty stare. Then she disappeared, just like that. One moment she was there, and the next she was gone. I stood in the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I'd just seen something truly terrifying, and I knew that the little girl wasn't going to leave me alone. Alright, so this is a story I've never told anyone, not even my closest friends. It's too weird and too creepy, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I need to get it off my chest. It started during the height of the pandemic. You know how quiet it was. Everyone was at home, and the city was practically deserted. Well, I was living alone in a small apartment in the Mission District. That's in San Francisco. It was a pretty typical place. Nothing special. But it was during those quiet nights that I started seeing it. At first, I thought I was just sleep deprived or something. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and see a shadowy figure standing in the corner of my room. It was always just there watching me. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, or a figment of my imagination, but it kept happening. The figure was tall and slender, with a long flowing cloak, its face obscured by shadows, but I could make out glowing red eyes. It was terrifying. I'd lie there frozen in fear, unable to move. I tried to ignore it, but it became impossible. The figure started appearing in other parts of the apartment. I'd see it in the hallway, in the kitchen, even in the bathroom. It was always there watching me. I tried to tell people about it, but they just laughed at me. They said I was crazy, that I was imagining things. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was going crazy. But then things started getting weirder. I'd hear strange noises coming from the apartment. Then the footsteps and whispers, even the sound of glass breaking. I'd get up to investigate, but there was nothing there. One night I was lying in bed, trying to sleep. That's when I felt a cold draft, and I heard a faint whisper. I opened my eyes and saw the figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was closer than I'd ever seen it before. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I felt a cold, icy hand touch my shoulder. I tried to fight it off, but I was frozen in place. Then I felt sharp pain in my chest. I gasped for air, and the figure vanished. I lay there gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of the apartment. I packed my things and moved out the next day, and I haven't been back since. I still see the figure sometimes in my dreams. It's always there, watching me. I don't know what it is, or why it's haunting me, but I know I'm not alone. There are other people who have seen it too. I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw, and it was terrifying. After moving out of that apartment, I tried to put the whole ordeal behind me. I moved to a new place, a smaller one, and tried to focus on my life. But the memories of the entity haunted me. I started doing some research. I looked into local legends and historical events. I even tried to contact a paranormal investigator. They just laughed at me. One day while I was browsing online, I came across a forum where people were discussing strange occurrences in the city. One of the posts mentions a tall, shadowy figure that had been seen by several people in different parts of the city. I felt a chill run down my spine. Would this be the same entity I had encountered? I decided to reach out to the person who had posted the message. We exchanged emails and eventually met in person. Well, it turned out they had also had a terrifying encounter with the figure. They described it in almost the same way I had. It was then that I realized I was not alone. There were other people who had seen this thing, and it wasn't just a figment of our imaginations. I started to wonder if the entity was tied to some sort of dark energy or history in the city. Maybe it was a guardian of something evil, a protector of a hidden secret. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that there was something sinister lurking beneath the surface of the seemingly ordinary city, and I was determined to uncover the truth. It was a cold, damp day in Yorkshire, England. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain lashed against the windpanes. Inside the cozy cottage, I sat by the fire, staring into the flames. My grandfather Thomas had passed away a week earlier, and I was struggling to cope. Thomas had been the center of my life. He had taught me everything I knew about the countryside, the local folklore, and the ancient mysteries that surrounded our home. I missed him terribly, and the silence of the house without his laughter and stories was almost unbearable. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise coming from the living room. I hesitated for a moment. I knew I was alone in the house, but the sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of someone walking. Gathering my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. The living room was dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from the fireplace. As I approached, I saw a figure sitting in my grandfather's favorite armchair. It was Thomas, or at least, it looked like him. He was wearing his old tweeded jacket and pipe, and his face was bathed in the warm glow of the fire. My heart raced. I knew it couldn't be real. Thomas was dead, but the figure looked so lifelike, so familiar. Grandfather, I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure turned and looked at me. His eyes were cold and empty, and there was a sinister smile playing on his lips. I screamed and ran upstairs. Slamming the door behind me, I locked myself in my bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, a dream brought on by grief, but I knew deep down that it was real. The next night, the figure returned. This time, it was standing at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding again in my chest. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached out and touched my face. Its cold, clammy fingers sent shivers down my spine. I tried to fight it off, but I was powerless. Then the figure vanished. I lay there trembling, unable to move. I knew I was in danger. The following night, I decided to comfort the figure. I armed myself with a crucifix and a bottle of holy water. Then I went downstairs. The figure was sitting in the living room, just as it had been the night before. I approached it slowly. "Leave me alone," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm not afraid of you." The figure stood up and walked towards me. Its eyes were filled with a cold, sinister hatred. I raised the crucifix and sprinkled the holy water on the figure. It hissed and writhed, its form twisted and contorting. Then, with a blood-curdling scream, it vanished. I collapsed to the floor, relieved but exhausted. I knew I had defeated the evil that had been haunting me, but I also knew that the ordeal had changed me forever. I'd always been drawn to the off-the-beaten-path places, the kind of places where history whispers in the wind and secrets linger in the shadows. So when I found myself driving through the French countryside, a solitary chapel nestled amidst rolling hills caught my eye. It was a 15th century gem, abandoned and forgotten, its weathered stones a testament to centuries of silence. Intrigue gnawed at me. I pulled over, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The chapel stood alone, a stark silhouette against the fading lights. As I approached, I felt a strange chill, even though the summer sun was still high. The air was thick with an eerie quiet, broken only by the distant caws of crows. The door was ajar, its hinges groaning in protest as I pushed it open. The interior was dark and musty, the scent of decay mingling with the faint aroma of incense. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through the stained glass windows. I wandered through the empty pews, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. A sense of unease crept over me. It was as if the chapel was watching me, its silent presence heavy in the air. I explored the altar, the worn stone floor, and the crumbling walls. As I reached the back of the chapel, I noticed a small arched doorway leading to a hidden room. Curiosity piqued, and I pushed the door open. The room was small and dimly lit, with a single window high up in the wall. In the center of the room stood a stone sarcophagus, its lid slightly ajar. A shiver ran down my spine. I had a feeling I shouldn't be here. As if sensing my discomfort, a cold draft swept through the room. I turned to leave, but the door was unlocked. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, my cries echoing through the abandoned chapel. Then suddenly, I heard a faint sound. It was like a whisper, a ghostly echo carried on the wind. I listened intently, my heart pounding. The sound grew louder and closer. Then I saw it. A figure, cloaked in shadow, emerged from the darkness, and it was a woman, tall and slender, her face obscured by a veil. She stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me. Fear gripped as I backed away. The woman took a step forward, her ethereal form seeming to shiver in the dim light. I turned to flee, but the door was still locked. The woman approached slowly, her eyes cold and empty. I felt a wave of terror wash over me as she raised her hand. Just as she was about to touch me, I heard a loud crash. The door burst open, and I bolted out of the chapel. I ran to my car, jumped in, and sped away, the woman's haunting figure still etched in my mind. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There, standing on the steps of the chapel, was this woman. She was watching me, her eyes filled with a chilling intensity. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, fleeing into the night. It started subtly enough. Strange noises in the attic, late night whispers, and a pervasive sense of unease. At first I dismissed it as the creaks and groans of an old house, but as the days turned into weeks, the occurrences became more frequent and more disturbing. One evening, while I was alone in the house, I heard a scratching sound coming from the attic. Curiosity piqued. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow, winding staircase. The attic was dark and dusty, the air thick with the scent of decay. As I peered into the shadows, I saw a small dark figure huddled into the corner. It was no more than a foot tall, with large beady eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. Its skin was a sickly shade of gray, and it had a long pointed tail. Fear gripped me as I realized what it was. It was an imp. A creature of darkness and evil. Ghostly imp. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The imp turned its head and looked at me, its eyes filled with a malicious glee. I backed away slowly. The imp began to move, its small body gliding across the attic floor. I tried to escape, but the door was locked. The imp approached me, its eyes never leaving mine. I felt a wave of terror wash over me as I reached out and touched my hand. A cold, icy sensation spread through my body, and I felt a strange tingling in my brain. I tried to fight it off, but it was useless. The imp's power was overwhelming. I fell to the floor, my body trembling uncontrollably. The imp hovered above me, its eyes filled with a sinister satisfaction. Then it began to chant a low guttural incantation. The air around me seemed to thicken, and a dark, oppressive energy filled the room. I felt a surge of darkness within me, a cold alien presence that was not my own. My mind raced, my thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. Then I saw it. A vision of the imp standing tall and powerful, surrounded by a halo of dark energy. It was a terrifying sight, a glimpse into the depths of evil. I screamed, my voice echoing through the attic. The imp vanished, and I was left alone, trembling and exhausted. I knew I had been possessed, that the imp had taken control of my body. I managed to break free from its grip, but the experience had left me scarred. I was never the same again. The imp had left its mark on me, a dark stain on my soul. I lived in fear for years, haunted by the memory of that night. I tried to forget it, to move on, but the imp's presence lingered, a constant reminder of the darkness that had touched my life. It was a cold, rainy night in late October. My partner Mike and I were responding to a disturbance called House 13 on Elm Street. According to the caller, there had been a loud argument followed by strange noises. As we pulled up to the house, the lights were off, and the only sound was the steady patter of rain on the roof. We knocked on the door, but there was no answer. We tried to handle, and to our surprise, it was unlocked. We stepped inside and called out police. Is everything okay? There was no response. We searched the house, but it was empty. The furniture was overturned, and there were broken glass and shattered porcelain scattered on the floor. It looked like a scene of a violent struggle. As we were examining the evidence, we heard a faint noise coming from the basement. We descended the creaky stairs, our flashlight cutting through the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, we found a woman lying on the floor, where she was unconscious, her face pale and drawn. We rushed to her side and checked on her vitals. She was barely breathing. We called for an ambulance and began to administer first aid. As we were tending to the woman, we heard a strange sound coming from the other side of the basement. It was a chilling moan, followed by a cold draft that swept the room. We exchanged a glance, our hearts pounding. There was something that was definitely wrong here. We turned our flashlight towards the source of the sound. In the dim light, we saw a figure standing in the corner of the basement. It was a woman, tall and slender, her face obscured by shadows. Her eyes were glowing an eerie blue, and she was staring at us with a malevolent intensity. Before we could react, the woman vanished. The basement plunged into darkness, and the only sound was the woman's labored breathing. We called for backup, our voices filled with fear. As we waited for reinforcements to arrive, we tried to make sense of what we had seen. It was clear that the woman was not the cause of the disturbance. She was a victim, not a perpetrator. The haunting in House 13 continued for weeks. We were called back to the scene multiple times, always finding the house in disarray, with evidence of paranormal activity. The woman who we later learned was named Sarah never recovered from her ordeal. That's when she remained in a coma, her mind trapped in a realm we could only imagine. Some of my colleagues dismissed the events at House 13 as a hoax or a collective hallucination, but I knew better. I'd seen the woman with my own eyes. I'd felt the cold draft, heard the chilling moans. It was real. The haunting of House 13 remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my career. It's a story I've never been able to fully explain, a mystery that continues to haunt me to this day.